What to do, friends and enemies? Jacob here, Miami Dolphins Syndicate. Happy draft day to those who celebrate. I know I will be parked on my couch watching the Dolphins hopefully not screw up this first round pick. We drafted in the first round somewhat decently over the last few years. Chop Robinson last year certainly came on at the end of the year, but looks like he is another hit, and certainly a draft that Chris Greer has to get correct, as he's certainly on the hot seat. And another man who is on the hot seat that has received quite a few bits of criticism over the last few months, over the last year or two, is head coach Mike McDaniel. Most recent bit of criticism now comes out via a report from Tony Pauline, talking about how some of the players have lost faith in Mike McDaniel and potentially no longer want to be a part of the Dolphins team, being the veterans on this roster. The report goes as following. Dolphins head coach Mike McDaniel has rubbed a lot of players the wrong way after early success with the team. Multiple sources tell me the main reason is that Mike McDaniel has rubbed a lot of veterans in the wrong way after early success with the team, and they'd rather play elsewhere than stay in Miami at this point. The Dolphins made the playoffs in year 2 of McDaniel's tenure, finishing with 11-6 record. They fell to 8-9 last year, and people inside the league tell me that this team has regressed further. So there's certainly a lot to unpack from that quote there. The most standout thing at the end that just slaps you in the face is pointing out the failure of a season that last year was for the Miami Dolphins. Back-to-back seasons making the playoffs, falling to 8-9, a below 500 record for the first year under Mike McDaniel, and a season that really couldn't have gone worse with both the injuries, the media drama following Tyreek Hill. It was just not great. And then you move further back up the article and look at what he says about the veteran players rather playing elsewhere. And that is a colossal failure on the end of Chris Greer. You bring in these veteran pieces, you bring them in as additions, you bring them in as the last pieces of a puzzle, in theory, to go all in and win a Super Bowl. And on paper, it looked like it was going to work. Obviously, it didn't. But one of the long-term ramifications that Chris Greer has shot himself in the foot with, as well as just shot this Dolphins team in general with, is you bring in these guys and you put them onto the long-term contracts that he has. You're looking at Jalen Ramsey. He's going to be under contract till he's 34 years old, and he's going to be very expensive at age 34. Tyreek Hill, you give him the biggest contract as a wide receiver ever. Bradley Chubb gets a massive extension. So these pieces that are certainly great players, or you thought were great players, are brought in, unfortunately, at the detriment to your younger players. Contrary to how Chris Greer operated with the team, you do not have an unlimited budget. You cannot just sign everybody you want. You can't just keep everybody you want. So you bring in Bradley Chubb, you bring in Tyreek Hill, you bring in Jalen Ramsey, and certainly talented players that have helped this Dolphins team in one way or another. But it has been of the detriment of players that, just like tonight, you've seen come in via the draft. Talented players entering the prime of their careers. Not just entering the prime of their careers, but players that 100% identify themselves in the NFL as a Miami Dolphin. Christian Wilkins, Javon Holland, Robert Hunt, Andrew Van Ginkel, Brandon Jones. These are talented players that most of which were the Dolphins used really good draft capital on. They came in, they see themselves as a Dolphin. They know nothing else in the NFL other than themselves as Miami Dolphins. That leads to a better locker room culture. That leads to a little bit more loyalty. Whereas these veterans that are brought in, Tyreek Hill previously of the Kansas City Chiefs, Jalen Ramsey previously of the Jacksonville Jaguars and Los Angeles Rams, Bradley Chubb previously of the Denver Broncos, while yes, they are being paid from the Dolphins, they are a member of the Miami Dolphins, they don't fully identify themselves as a Miami Dolphin. So when things start hitting the fan, they are likely not the ones to look towards to lift this team up, because while yes, they're certainly in the moment and they are Dolphins players, but they're not. Their heart isn't fully attached. By the time they retire, I hope they'll look fondly back with their time with the Dolphins, but they'll look fondly at their time with other teams as well. They're not fully committed to being a Dolphin, whereas you have a 22-year-old player, 23-year-old player, fresh out of college, making pretty good money, on a good team that trusts them, that puts them on the field, that puts them in a position to have success. You're going to see loyalty there. You're going to see a bright culture, and that has been destroyed by Chris Greer and also in turn by Mike McDaniel. This Dolphins culture really peaked in the year 2021, 2022, when so many of those young pieces that I mentioned were on the precipice of really reaching their peak, and you were getting great great reps out of Christian Wilkins, out of Robert Hunt that got those massive extensions, and you've now seen Brandon Jones, who quite wasn't there at his peak, now move on to the Broncos, and he looks like he's in the prime of his career. You have those young players who are hungry, that are ready to win, and you bring in players that have won elsewhere for the most part with Jalen Ramsey and Tyreek Hill. You've seen the successes that they've had elsewhere, and you hope they can replicate that here. And they come in with that expectation that they're going to win here. Well, yes, it is certainly on their end to live up the price tag, live up the draft picks we gave up for them. However, they're entering with a slightly different mindset. Certainly, yes, they still expect to win. They certainly expect to be a piece of that. But they're brought in as the final pieces of a puzzle. They expect to look at the team. They expect to see a team that is well built, that they are now coming in to help win a championship. It is, of course, still on them, and they have to be professionals, but you can't help but slightly in the back of your mind, you look at who they think you are. They think you're the final piece of the puzzle. And then now a couple years later, you're looking as Jalen Ramsey, as Tyreek Hill, as Bradley Chubb. You very well can find yourselves looking at it like, wait a minute. Yes, you just filled out the corners, you filled out the rest, but where's the meat of the puzzle? It's all gone. Someone took away the pieces and now are using it on their own puzzle. So me as a corner piece, what am I doing here still? Why am I a member of this Dolphins team that I was brought in thinking I'm finishing things? Now I'm all that's left. That is one way to look at it, and I couldn't really blame the players for doing so, especially since the Dolphins haven't done a great job at establishing themselves as a tougher culture. You see that with how the team plays. We are one of the softer teams in the league, so it is undeniable the Dolphins have one of the more softer mentalities as a team in general. Now, if you want to point it back inwardly at the players, specifically look at the defensive side of the ball, you can say, well, hey, this is the second offseason in a row that the players, quote unquote, are rubbed the wrong way by a member of the coaching staff, whether that was Vic Fangio last year and now Mike McDaniel. So you look at what Vic Fangio then went on to do. An excellent season with that Philadelphia Eagles defense that needed a new mind in there to bring them to the next level, and boy, did he absolutely do that. The Philadelphia Eagles were arguably the best defense on the best team in the NFL last season. So you look at the success that Vic Fangio had, and you look how the players responded to him last year. It's like, okay, well, the players were rubbed the wrong way by Fangio, but clearly he was able to go just 1 year later, win a championship with that defense being as talented as it was, and there was just as many young players on that defense. There were just as many stars on the defense. So what's different with that Eagles team that they were able to get behind Fangio and work with him, even if maybe they weren't best friends, they were able to figure out, and they were able to take their talent and they were able to elevate themselves with Fangio as a defensive coordinator. So now you take that to 2025, and okay, well, now players in general across the team are feeling this way about Mike McDaniel. So at what point do you point the fingers at the players and say, hey guys, you're professionals. You are under contract to play for this team. You are making a lot of money. You are living out your dream right now, playing for a professional football team, making a whole lot of money, making big plays. You just ran out the defensive coordinator who just took the Eagles to become the best defense in the entire NFL and win the Super Bowl, right? You just did that to our defensive coordinator last year. You are not going to do that to our head coach. Because when does it stop? If you get the defensive coordinator fired, right, and I'm not insinuating that players are looking to get Mike McDaniel fired, right, but if the shoe fits, last year you got Vic Fangio fired. Now you're saying this about Mike McDaniel. Where does the line stop? Who will you respect? Because you got the older, more rigid approach with Vic Fangio, and then you got the younger, more charismatic, more player-friendly approach with Mike McDaniel. So it's like, okay, what do you want? You're a professional. You're being paid. You're under contract. Figure it out. You don't have to like the guy. Maybe he rubs you the wrong way. It doesn't matter. You're brought into play. You're being paid to play. Figure it out. These are not reports that you want to see coming out on draft night. The Dolphins with a really good draft pick here this year that hopefully will be used to fill the void that was left by one of these guys that went on to now play the prime of their careers elsewhere. So on one hand, I absolutely understand the frustration from some of these veterans. However, it was already established last year that they did the same thing. The guy that they did it to went on and won the Super Bowl. So figure it out. Miami Dolphins, they usually don't, but please, for the love of God, just figure it out, because I don't want to see a bad season. I understand things are not going to be as good as they were 2 years ago, right? I understand we're probably not going to win the Super Bowl. However, it would nice to be competent. It would nice to have a good enough defense. It'd be nice to see the offense, even if we're not necessarily in position to win the division. Be entertaining, be competent, and then figure out what to do with McDaniel and Chris Greer at the end of the season. All right, that's enough for me. We'll see y'all hopefully in a few hours whenever the Dolphins make their pick, one way or another. We'll see you probably in a few hours. Let me know down below who you want the Dolphins to draft. We'll catch you then. See you. Go Dolphins.